Thank you for joining us this afternoon. To start, Mr. Philip, may I ask a question? Can you share a memorable story about your parents' creativity process?
Well, yeah, so I mean, they're both two different people. My mother and my father were, I've just realized that my mother started out in life also as a visual artist, but for some reason, when she met him, she gave up. And so she was more involved with writing. His So he died when I was 13 years old, and just a few years before he died, I was a delinquent kid, and I wasn't really that interested in what Daddy was doing, and I was interested in the Rolling Stones and bell bottoms and growing my hair. So I didn't know him all that well, and also the end of his life was spent, a large amount of time was spent doing electronics and doing his research into bats. So I have a feeling of how the guy functioned. But so it's almost I'm in the same position as you, really looking at the work to trying to work out work backwards from this. I think it's obvious one of the things that you can see in all of this work is that he was inspired by other people. I mean, there are so not many artists nowadays who are going to sit with a model and do portraits, and a large proportion of his work was with people present. And, some of the time, even the pictures were um, they didn't resemble the sitter that much, yet he still wanted to have the company of the person present in order to do the work. So yeah, I think this is possibly the biggest inspiration. But it's funny because I don't know where any of his inspiration comes from in terms of his childhood, because I don't know. I know nearly nothing about what kind of a guy he was as a kid, and his family were apparently not interested in art at all. Um, and it's rather strange. So you've got somebody, whether who comes from a background with no artistic interest, ends up in Chingola, or I'm not sure exactly whether he was some of the time in Mufulira. It was a time when there was nothing much there, copper mines and a little bit of sports being played. And he starts being interested in art. So I guess you have to say that it really comes from the environment. I mean, obviously an inner drive from him, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. Has anybody got any thoughts looking at the work as to any other ideas or stuff that looks like an inspiration coming out in the work?
Thank you so much. I think you have answered me amply. And also you've actually covered part of my questions that I was going to put to you. Thank you so much. Let me open this to everyone else to contribute what they think may have inspired the extraordinary artist who left this legacy to us. Hello, everyone. You are free to participate.
Okay. Can I come in?
Yes.
So yeah, my name is Bulani Muleya. I have the pleasure of having a conversation, Philip, with regards to the exhibition that is currently running or open at the gallery. And what I must say that really sort of like fascinated me in this whole projection of art is when we were touring the city, or even before that, I used to notice the terrazzo stone sculptures that are at the Museum of Human Sciences. And what really drew me in was how, at a certain time of existence, there was this fascination of incorporating arts with architecture. Now, if you look at the Museum of Human Sciences, you notice that the artwork really are part of the building. They are part of the architect. Instead of a situation where you find the artwork just being placed somewhere in front of a building, but in this case, it's actually incorporated within the building, which is something that I found really, really fascinating. And also how, David's artwork has, also allowed us to travel into time, travel back into time and try to understand some of these things that were happening during the 60s, because this museum was opened in 1964. And this also sort of like has led me to try and find out more about, how architecture and, artwork were at a certain time the in thing. And I also am very, very interested in trying to find out what sort of other structures, within the city, bear the same resemblance with the Museum of Human Sciences. And it has also led me to try and find out also some of the locations that David's work may be located within the city of Harare. And in my efforts to try and find out more, I also just then discovered that there are some experimental works that David actually was up to. And what I noticed is that at one point he was also experimenting with a certain type of, concrete that would sort of like replace the usual concrete that we are aware of. And some of these experimental flows said to have been laid at Prince Edward High School. I am yet to go and visit Prince Edward and try to find out if these experimental flows are still intact. I think it's something that could be worth it to sort of like find out if, those experimental flows, are still intact.
Yeah, this was with mixing straw with concrete, I think it was. Actually, just one thing to comment. I entirely forgot you mentioned Dolphin House, and it is entirely slipped my memory that the existence of that and the sculpture of the dolphin out there. I have no records of it, and so I'm curious how come you managed to trace Dolphin House as being one of the things. It didn't come from me because totally slipped my memory.
It was through research that we came across the information. It's actually it's documented in a PDF. If you don't mind, I'll share it with you later.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm curious also, there are a load of maquettes. I remember these being made as a kid, and there are many Madonnas, which I'm sure there were a few churches which featured some of the sculpture. I mean, there are a couple of photos that we have of some of these being made. And I've never traced which churches they are or where they are, and if any of these sculptures still exist. So as an ongoing thing, it would be interesting to find out if anybody ever does figure out where they are.
Sure. The reason why we carried out a tour to these 4 sites is due to their proximity to our National Gallery. Otherwise, we knew that he had some other works at the Harare Public Library, at the now Salim Mugabe Hospital, which is Harare Hospital. There are several other works also in Bulawayo. They are numerous.
Are there?
Yes.
I know of one in Bulawayo, which was Woolworths building, but nothing else there. So my memory was well, you know, so just to digress for a second, you have lots of artists who have physical capabilities, and especially if you're a sculptor, it's a question of, you know, you have a workshop and you have machines and what kind of things you can do. And I think what was interesting about him, was that you know, he had this construction company, which meant that he had large premises and machinery, you know, marble cutting machinery, all kinds of things to be done on a quite a heavy level. And as an artist, it's quite interesting to think about what you can do when you have the, if I can put it, the horsepower to do things. You know, I mean, they had a railway line which came up to the factory. So, you know, in theory, if somebody wanted to put a 50-ton piece of marble on it and deliver it there, you could have the thing transported. Yeah, in terms of, you know, I've been trying to think about the construction of the animals outside the museum. I can only guess. I mean, I remember that factory place. I used to play there. In fact, the first few years of our life, we were living in rooms which are attached to the factory in the Flay in Hood Road. So, you know, the whole construction of everything I was playing with this as a kid with cement and you know, all the stuff was happening in front of me. But I don't have any real memories about the actual process of constructing those animals. When you think about it, I mean, they're pretty big things. I mean, the simplest thing is, was this thing constructed in a factory and brought on a truck and deposited at the museum, or was it taken in pieces and then finished off afterwards? And then the whole process, these things were done in terrazzo, so they must have been modeled first of all. I mean, I remember there's a picture of a pangolin, and I remember that he made small sculptures 2 or 3 feet across, which were of the animals. Yeah, but then when you think about it, okay, so now you want to do something 10, 15 feet across. It must have been built up with clay or something, you know, reinforcement. I think it had to be made into a model which was made with something, maybe with plaster, and then a mold made of it. Because, you know, there are not many sculptures which are made of terrazzo. And terrazzo is not cast as a solid thing. Usually what you do if you're facing something is you have a thin area which is going to face the public, where you put, you know, beautiful stones in your colored cement, and behind that you have reinforcement and concrete. So these things, you know, it must have been technically rather complicated to make these things. And also you know, I know the antenna on the snail is broken, but that was many, many years ago. On the other hand, these things have survived. They don't seem to have cracked into pieces. So I don't know, just now that I think about it, it's quite a technical exercise and quite interesting.
Yes, these sculptures are quite impressive. We saw them. There are 5 of them. There's a tortoise, a praying mantis, a chameleon. They look very real, and they're still in good shape. That was a good observation on your part. They haven't changed in any way, and they are all made out of terrazzo. Thank you for the contribution.
I should get some of these pictures to share on screen in a moment. Yeah, let's move on.
Yes. Is there anyone who wants to share their experience on what
Can
you... Okay.
Can I come in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Philip. And I would also want to take this opportunity to thank Saki, who introduced us a few years ago. And also that the team was able to go to the house after your introduction to your late sister, who also opened the house for us to be able to see the work whilst it was still in situ. I was just talking to Sasha Will-Smith, who knew about your dad and yourself when you're still young, and knowing that the work when your dad passed on, the work was still in the house, and how intact it was in the house. And it's a work that really inspired this exhibition. I know that it has taken us so long for us to be able to do the exhibition, and work looks different in the gallery when it was still in the house. And the feedback we are getting from so many people is such an amazing feedback in a way. But my question really is about the work after the exhibition. What do you do with the work?
Oh,
And because right from drawing as a process, painting as a process, sculpture as a process, your father was this articulate person whose work really speaks for itself today and speaks to the journey that he has taken as an artist, also inspired by other artists. And the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, just going through, there's a booklet that was done by Frank McEwen called New Art from Rhodesia. Well, I also tried to look at whether your father's work was in that book. But this is an opportune moment even for us to be able to show an artist whose work really speaks to both the African side and the Western side. Because when I had some audience who I took inside the gallery and looking at those paintings of the African women and drawings of the African women, that was the subject matter which he explored in a very powerful and articulate way. So my question is, what happens after the exhibition?
well, my intention really is to have it shown in as many places as possible. So I'm really trying to explore any other venues who want to show the work. I don't want to split it up. If possible, this is, I mean, it's one of those things when you think about it. Actually, as an academic question, I thought the other day, oh, this is terrible. He destroyed lots of his early paintings if he didn't like them. And so there are not that many pieces which are left. We found all these photos with many other pictures of things which don't exist anymore. 115 pieces or so for an entire lifetime is a tiny number. And you're featuring pretty much everything that's left behind. There are a few pieces which are in private hands elsewhere. It's not really something where you really want to split it up. While all of that is together, there seemed to be a best opportunity to put on some other shows. So immediately after that, I mean, I think the strongest possibility that I have, since most galleries and museums are booked up for years, is probably here in Napa Valley. There are a lot of very big wineries with a lot of premises, and I've had an exhibition of my own photos at one of these places. They would probably be very happy to feature a major exhibition of work. But other than that, I will probably find some venues. I mean, clearly, I'd be interested in finding people who want to show the stuff from the, for example, Poland. A lot of Polish people are, he's fundamentally is Polish background. There seems to be a lot of interest in Poland, in the Jews who ran away, and so you could imagine that some galleries in Poland would be interested in showing the work. So yeah, it's up in the air, the plans for it. But there's also, as you know, there are many of the sculptures are still plaster. These were things which were not cast in bronze, and they are very delicate. So there's another set of plans. There might be some kind of partnership that I do with somebody in order to cast some of them in bronze. I probably at least should come along and bring
Hi, can I speak a bit? Okay. I'm related David when I was 4.5 years old, which is a long time ago. But I would like to raise the fact that David was a refugee, and he found his home in Zimbabwe, which is kind of extraordinary. He brought some background of Europe, but he painted a lot of pictures of Africa, which is kind of extraordinary. My view of David, he was a traveler, or he had adventure in his mind, because he did a lot of traveling, different places in the world, and he was sort of an extraordinary person. I'm trying to read. Obviously, I don't remember much as a almost 5 years old person. I do an adventurer. Even in his picture, you can actually see it, and in photographs, you can see that he was an adventurer. That's sort of the feeling that I have as looking at it as a person, what he was. And obviously his paintings and sculptures actually show it as that kind of a person.
I think one thing is, being a refugee or clearly sharpens you up to some things. I mean, this is not an experience unique to him. There are so many Zimbabweans who traveled all over the place. I mean, here in California, there are plenty of people who've gone through a similar kind of a thing, traveled to somewhere else far away in the world and coping on their own. But it definitely sharpens you to impressions. If you have to adapt to a different culture, I think the thing that's most interesting about him was that he ended up in Africa with everything new to him at a time when indigenous people there were having to cope with an incredible shock. I mean, it was still relatively backwards up in by the Kofiwe River and so on. This was in 1938. It was, you know, some people still hunting and walking around barefoot with spears, and other people were clearly working in the mines and highly educated. But I mean, you're talking about a culture that had to span a huge amount of changes. But in terms of, well, it's nothing to do with adventure, but just something came to mind the other day, which was just a story. I'm not sure. You read in occasionally they talk about, you know, everybody used to call a guy, you know, a Renaissance man or a genius or whatever, and to some degree that's true. But a lot of people talk about people who had an injury to their head, which caused them to become special afterwards. The story was that David, when he was a kid, was too poor to have dumbbells and to go to the gym, and that he was doing weightlifting and lifting up a rock above his head, and that he dropped it on his head once. So that was the idea, that he bashed his head at one point, and that made him a smart guy. Yeah, I don't know. There seem to be an awful lot of people that you come across who are incredibly accomplished nowadays. It just somehow, it seemed that back at that period, that was more unusual than now. I mean, maybe it's simply because this technology allows more people to do more amazing things. But in those days, people seemed to think you went to school, you did your learning, and after that, you never learned anything anymore. And you did your job, and then you retired early, and you sat next to the swimming pool. That's what you did with life. So it would be interesting to know what might have happened to him had he continued. I've got, you know, this is a rather late stage to try and research the guy, because there are very few people around who actually met him, or at least were old enough to know anything about him. Just in the last couple of days, I spoke to a woman who was a teenager, and for some reason in 1963, I think it was, that she and somebody else traveled to Cape Town together. I have no idea what this was about. And I'm trying to piece it together. But she said to me, oh, the medical school in Cape Town were offering him a laboratory and a staff to do more research on bats. And that's interesting, a little piece of information like that. But I'm still thinking, you know, why didn't he? Maybe people in those days, I suppose, people would have got on an airplane to fly to Cape Town. Why did he go with a friend and drive all the way to Cape Town? That sounds well. Anyway, like everything there, it's you know, trying to piece things together. It's interesting going back.
Yeah. Can I come in?
Yes, please do come in.
The other thing that really kind of strikes me about David's life of science and art is, look, we are talking of an individual who comes into Africa, you know, without prior experience in art or science. And his engagement with local, you know, at that time could partly have shaped his experiences, you know, with African art. And I remember one time, Philip, we were having this conversation and saying how, you know, while some European artists, you know, only engaged with African art from afar, here is David, you know, mingling with the art in real time, which I think is really something that stands out in terms of his experiences as someone who was coming up, you know, without prior knowledge of any art or whatsoever. Would you, Philip, would you relate some of his experiences to anything that he might have learned while he was in Poland? Have you been able to, trace some of his, activities in terms of the art space while he was in his native Poland?
Well, no. I mean, the information is so thin. There are a few letters from a brother who seems a pretty dull guy. I mean, this is a guy who never survived the war. I mean, what happened was that there were three brothers who managed to leave around 37 or maybe it was, around 1937, who ended up in Johannesburg. I think one of them ended up in USA to start with. These guys were, well, they came from a family who had a confectionery business. So one of them set up making lucky packets in Johannesburg, and other people got involved in construction and plumbing and so on. There was never any interest whatsoever from any of them, so that's one thing. Secondly, looking at the few letters that I've got between the brother who was left behind in Poland, well, I read also in the document that my grandmother was. He must have learned a little bit of English somewhere, but I think what happened really was that a lot of these people around there were just incredibly. I don't think it's much different than Zimbabwe now. People did anything that they could, and they weren't necessarily formally taught. Incredibly ingenious. I think everybody there learned of English. They all seemed to be ready to try their hand at anything when they went away, but there seemed to be no education, no mention of anything. This guy, the brother who was writing these letters, was writing saying, "How are things? Everything's boring here." And David is writing back to him and saying, "Things are very boring here." And that seemed to be the extent. Please send more money. That's all I could see. So really no background of that. You look at some of the very early paintings, and you see kind of a romantic style. I mean, I don't know where he picked up this sort of stuff. Picasso was producing modern art, I don't know, 50 years before that point. It's he's painting pictures, the picture, one or two pictures of my mother wearing the Spanish veil. I mean, I don't know where he got these ideas that this is what art is about, and it's so out of date at that point. But from what you said about his exposure to African art, I think it's noticeable that he could have really have said, "Okay, I'm going to see what's modern in the world centers, and I'm going to paint like that. I'm going to do African masks and so on." I just had this thought that if you're living alongside artists who are doing that kind of stuff. And you copy noticeable. If you're Picasso and you go to a museum, you've never been to Africa, you've never seen any piece of art, never met an African artist who made the sculpture, it's easy to say, "Oh, I'm going to do my version of that." But I think I see in David's early work that it was he was trying to be a romantic. It's funny also with the photos. I just discovered all these photos recently, and I thought the guy never had any photographic sense at all. But in those early days, he was taking photos which were, they had composition in them. He didn't really need to paint the same, he didn't really need to substitute photography by painting, because he was competent in taking photos at that point. I mean, the history of art was largely that at one point people painted portraits of people because there were no cameras around. You know, you wanted to remember what somebody looked like. So it's a funny beginning, but definitely as things went along, and we had some questions about, you know, travel and the influence of travel. There was a big journey that they made, 6 months, 7 months journey through Congo, eventually through Dar es Salaam, and then back again. So this must have been late 50s. It was quite an adventure in those days. There weren't many roads anywhere, and so the influence of whatever art that he saw in that trip made a difference. And then they made another trip where he was away for a year and a half, driving overland through India, all the way, you know, even taking a car to Japan and Java, Indonesia, and so on. You can see his painting later on became much more modern, if I can put it that way. And it's funny how slow it was to decide to start doing abstract pictures. I think that's noticeable that I think a lot of people nowadays that would just start out from art college immediately producing abstract work.
Well, Philip, if
Yeah.
I just wanted to take you back in the exhibition, because there's a notable portrait of a lot of portraits of your mother. Then there's a notable portrait of Ian Smith.
Well, yeah, you saw that resemblance. I don't think that was Ian Smith. I don't think he liked Ian Smith. I can't see that he would have any interest in painting a picture of Ian Smith, but there's
that's my own observation. When you look at it, you really see Ian Smith.
Yeah, I agree that looks very much like it, but I just I can't imagine. I mean, you know, remember that when he died, there was the first year or two of
Federation.
Yeah, no, it was what you call it, UDI. I think he died in 67. Wasn't UDI something like
63?
63.
Yeah.
So it was 4 years into this. All I can say is that I remember the family's, you know, contempt for the Rhodesian Front and all of these values. I also found lots of documentation which showed that David was much more active than I thought in the early years of the Federation in terms of campaigning for one man, one vote and equality and so on. I often thought of him as being something of a liberal, but somebody who didn't do that much about it. But he clearly was participating in more things. I mean, he wasn't. I have a cousin who was part of ZANU in London. It wasn't quite that far, but no, I cannot see. I mean, I took a photo of Ian Smith. I knew his son, and I went round to their place and took a picture of them just simply because I thought I have all these pictures of other people here. I need to have a neutral picture of anybody. Yeah, but he seemed to, you know, in terms of our family, it seemed a grotesque kind of a period. I just cannot imagine that that's Ian Smith.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were just looking at it from a perspective of the way it was curated, possibly looking at other members of those portraits to think, could they have been cabinet ministers or friends of Ian Smith? And that's the way we were just looking at it.
Well, he knew Walensky, and in fact, I went and photographed Walensky years later, simply because my mother knew him from the back. that Walensky was more his kind of a guy, and I mean that kind of a dream of you know, as far as I gather, your multiracial future for the Federation, that was being planned at that point. But no, I think this was a major disappointment, and I think that his I don't know, you know, he arrived in the country without, I mean, he did pretty well, but he didn't come to the country in order to have a good life. There were lots of people from Britain who thought they will have an easier life in the colonies and have more opportunities. And Britain was depressed after the war. So lots of people, quite a lot of the people, white people who came to Zimbabwe were simply hoping to get rich and have swimming pools and all that kind of stuff. It was never really part of his interest in that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But I also like his use of the palette knife in most of his paintings, which I think he really mastered the palette knife.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when you look at the very early paintings, they were done with a brush. And then the palette knife came along. You know, if you think of what was, you know, current in the West, that was going to be abstract painting and splashing paint around the place, and he was still sitting with people and doing likenesses. But, you know, it started out with a degree of abstraction with the palette knife. I mean, it really was, if you went up close to the painting, it was an abstract painting, and then slowly became looser and looser. I often thought, what would have happened? It seemed to me as if when he died, it was all, well, compared with other, yeah.
So when David passed on, you were becoming a teenager, and you have since been researching his legacy, and you also have produced an art book. I really like how in our previous conversation you sort of like assumed the role of a critic, you know, analyzing David's work, life, and art, and his, you know, creative processes. I will ask two questions. The first one being, you know, how pleasurable has been this experience, you know, of researching and trying to find out about your father's legacy. And then also during this conversation that we were having, you mentioned how, you know, David's work has never been critiqued. Is there still a possibility? Is there still room for this, you know, critiquing of his work?
Well, I think that's really down to the people who are motivated to make a comment on it. I mean, I think, you know, mostly what people want to do is to find some kind of context or a story. And I think largely, if you lived in Europe in a place where nothing much changed around you, then most of the criticism is going to be a description of how you compared to the people who came before you, and you know, whether you used egg tempura or whether you used something else, you know. So it's dug down to really what can you say about the person. I think the thing about him is that overall, I don't know really, you know, if you break it down into art history, I mean, to some degree, in terms of standard criticism, you could say, well, you know, he missed the boat. You know, it should have been a long time ago when people thought that he was doing something new. I mean, you have this mania nowadays that everything has to be new, original, creative, and so on and so forth. You know, I sometimes think, well, you compare some of what he did, oh, it looks like Picasso. Well, people, I don't know if I've got a correct perspective on it, but I think Picasso was doing some things that David was making pictures that looked similar, but that was done 50, 80 years before that. So if you want to take a point of view of an art critic and say, what did he do that was new? What is his place in the context of other artists? It's probably a little bit difficult in not that you're not going to find stylistically that many things which are that original. I mean, you look at, what do you call it, what's his name? Slipped my mind, but is a Jewish Epstein. Well, Epstein did loads of portraits, of sculptured portraits in clay. They look fairly similar to David's work. He did a few things which were, quite a few things which were external, sculptural, architectural sculptures. You could say, well, there's not that much originality, but I don't know. I mean, I think, if one has to defend the merit of David, I think it's really much of the time I come to the conclusion that every artist is really unique to their own context. They have their own story about them, and it's not maybe not so useful always to be comparing one artist to another artist. It's much more interesting to say, well, what kind of a life did somebody live and what were their interests? And, the work is a kind of it's like an echogram. I mean, it's like you put a stethoscope and you listen to what came off from somebody's life. It doesn't necessarily have to be that original to be interesting. I keep thinking, well, if you really had to be original and you were a novelist, you'd have to invent all new words, and everybody's using the same old alphabet and the same old words. So that part of it's not original. So I don't know. It's really up to other people if they wish to make a comment. The thing that I noticed, however, is ordinary people who are not immersed in art have no difficulty of simply responding to his work. And I think some of the people in galleries and so on, they're trying to pin him down. What kind of an artist was he? And they have difficulty with this, and that's more of a problem for them. I don't know. This is the thing. I mean, you guys are appreciating the work, and I'm curious as to what you respond to. And I mean, do you really compare him to other artists when you think about his work, or is it simply here's a story about a guy and here are the pictures that go with it? Yeah, so interested if there's any comment on that. We've got, sorry, carry on.
I don't think you want to compare. I think when you look at art, you look at a picture and it does something inside of you, whether you like it or it has some kind of meaning. Not necessarily, it's something inside of you that invoke some feelings, and you really can't compare it from one artist to another. It's the vision, the vision that makes either interest you or invoke something unique. So I've been looking at the pictures, and every one of them has some feeling to it. Obviously, your mother has a big feature in many of the pictures, and especially the one that the cover of the book is extraordinary, I think.
And that's the one which is not in the show. It's here because it was so damaged. I just grab it. I had to, all the paint was falling off. If you can see this here,
Yeah.
you'll see all the paint has come off from the eyes. So this thing, the paint was coming off like confetti. And yeah, I had to try and use all kinds of glues and varnishes and so on to even rescue it and bring it here. That's a bit of a shame. It's funny. I mean, I'm a retoucher, an expert retoucher, and I scanned the picture, and I had some old pictures to fill in the bits. And I've now reproduced that thing perfectly in massive resolution. And then it comes to the really painting it in to rescue a painting that's a different kind of a skill. Yeah, it's in this modern age, you think, well, you know, I've got it in digital form. Do we need the original anymore? But yeah. On the other hand, actually, I was speaking to somebody who was an expert photo, what do you call it, recoverer, just north of here, and we were discussing the paints and the techniques, and he said, well, people are getting me to repair these paintings, and they want them they want my work to last another 200 years. He was saying, as I sit there painting away, thinking, is humanity even going to be here in 200 years? So am I wasting my time mixing up all the right paints and all the right chemistry and so on? It's funny. It's an interesting change of perspective now that we've got, I mean, the invention of photography, and now with digital stuff. Yeah, I've got a few questions passed on to me. Much of it was to do with some of the science that he was involved in, and also the travel. I think so. What he did later in life was, I don't know why. I mean, he did a course in radio repair. I found a few certificates. This was before the invention of transistors, in fact. And given that he didn't have any schooling and so on. Anyway, he suddenly decided that when he came back from the Far East, that he was going to try and make an instrument so blind people could read writing. And then he discovered that Xerox company were putting much more money into it, you know, with little. It was originally had the idea of a little thing that you moved over a newspaper, and it would give you a different note every time you passed over a different letter. I mean, now with computers and digital stuff, that's all possibility. But then he then thought, well, I'll make a blind aid, you know, a method whereby a blind person could walk around and use sound to get through headphones. They could hear if there was something in front of them and how far away it was. And this moved on to starting to research bats, and then to finding new methods of new interpretation as to how bats could see. And then he got involved with people from the university and electronics people who were working with him. And then this was eventually moving on to be having theories about dolphin speech, because dolphins use sonar. And it's funny, you know, in those days, nowadays, the whole idea of somebody involving art, and, you know, art is so mixed up with technology and digital work, it's not that surprising. But when he was around, everybody was surprised. How can you be an artist and a scientist at the same time? I suppose that's one of the things which doesn't look that unusual from the present moment, but was definitely interesting at the time. I think possibly, I don't know, it changes your perspective on the art. I mean, it's a little bit like you know, you have an abstract painter, and especially when I was a kid, people said, "Oh, they are cheats. They don't know how to paint. That's why they're trying to cheat you by splashing paint on the canvas." Well, all you've got to do really is show them, "Oh, I can paint like Michelangelo, or I can do a drawing like that." And, you know, "Are you satisfied? I can do it. I chose to put splash paint on the canvas." It puts it into a different perspective if you think that somebody could do something else. And I suppose also the same sort of an idea is that if you're involved in science and so on, you know, why do you bother painting pictures? Clearly, painting pictures has to be something quite important if you're going to take the trouble to do it when it's packaged in the same human being. So, yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think you've discussed this so much, and it has shown that there's so much information concerning the extraordinary artist. We still have a lot to learn about him from what I've gathered, from what you've been saying and what Mr. Kumbulani has said. And also, this has brought us to know what could have inspired him to come up with some of the paintings and the pictures that he drew due to his traveling expeditions. Now, at this juncture, I would have wanted to ask a question concerning his business of, I would have wanted to ask a question concerning his Terrastone company.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but now I'm not sure if you are going to be able to ask if, by what you have said, that he, at the time of his passing on, you were around 13 years of age. Yeah, I wanted to find out what was the key to their success in business. That is marble and terrazzo. Yes.
Well, I collected a couple of stories from which are sort of obliquely interesting to that. I think the thing was that his company, he was innovative, and but I think it was he delivered. So one of the stories, there's some guy who was a teenager who I interviewed not long ago, and I asked him about David, and the thing that he remembered was, oh, David went into a meeting, maybe it was Livingston House or one of those other companies, with Costain and a couple of these big international companies who were competing with him to get the job. And he said that all those other guys arrived in suits, which, as you can imagine, in Zimbabwe, people don't wear suits all that often for work. But anyway, they went to the meeting, and David arrived in his short pants. And he said that all these other people laughed at him, you know, and yet he got the job. So I can't really, I mean, I can't really make any comment on what these other companies were doing, but I think much of the competition against him were some of these big international companies, and they were not, they're probably I don't know, bureaucratic, probably, you know, ruled from London with some manager who came here who was following orders. But, you know, it's because this terrazzo seems to have been a much bigger feature in Harare than it is in many other places. I mean, I've traveled to many other places in Europe, you rarely see terrazzo. And here in the USA, I read that it was a very popular material in the 20s and 30s, but nowadays you don't see too much terrazzo anywhere. Yet the facing on so many buildings there, it seemed to be a fashionable thing. I don't know, if this is popular in South Africa even. But how many, the number of buildings that his company faced, or did the external facing for it. I mean, I think I'm correct that it was the National Archives, that there was a library. You mentioned Dolphin House. There are a couple of photos that I've got. I can't really tell which was Shell House. These are big. Well, there's a Harare Club that definitely had his little sculptures of, or at least the tiles with his sculpture of sable antelope up them. But it's a large proportion of buildings in town that were involved in this company. I don't know. I remember, well, he gave up the company when he came back from the Far East. He had a heart attack, and the Furini, who was running the company when he was away, took over the company. So I used to go back there occasionally. Definitely in terms of the workmen, everybody was telling me, your dad was such a good guy. So I don't remember a particular harshness from it, but maybe some allegiance from the workers might have been part of the reason for its success. I just, I don't remember any technical excellence. I just took for granted however the company worked. But I am still amazed at the scale of some of the stuff. I mean, pure organization to trucks, large numbers of people, plans, and so on and so forth. It's something or other which I'm not involved with.
Sure, I think you've answered well. At least you went to the company also to find out for yourself how they were working. You showed some interest in the company.
Well,
Now,
the first 6 or 7 years, we actually lived by the factory. And then beyond that, what they put a railway line through the factory building and our house in Hood Road, and then the government forced the sale of the property. So at this point, that was when they decided to build a new factory building and to also, with this money, to build the house in Highlands. So at that point, of course, beyond 8 years old, then it was a question of getting a ride with your parents to the factory unit. It was separate from where we were, but I remember going there a lot. I remember mainly being interested in the machinery and playing around with marble and doing things there. So yeah, it was. I just don't really. There must have been something effortless about his management, because it never seemed to me. Nowadays, you meet people and they work so hard. Their entire life is devoted to their business. They don't talk about anything else. They don't do anything else. And there was this guy who had this business, and when he went home, it was not really a topic of conversation. So it either speaks about the period or about his ability to manage things naturally.
I also have a question. How, related to what you were saying, how did he have time to do the art and at the same time have a business? When did he actually do the art?
Well, Yeah, I mean, that is really a question. Nowadays, everybody, as I said, seems to be that everybody's stressed out and doesn't have time for anything. And he certainly did. Well, I suppose there are not that many works of art, if you consider it. On the other hand, he died at, what was it, 51, 52 years old. He wasn't doing things that long. I mean, clearly, in the very beginning in Northern Rhodesia, from what I read from my mother's memoirs, that he spent 2 weeks learning plumbing from his brother in Johannesburg. And then he went up to Northern Rhodesia and he called himself a plumber and then got a job with Wilbur Smith's dad, who was responsible for building an entire village around the mine, one of the mines there. And according to what she writes, was that he was responsible for plumbing all the buildings in the mine, and then had nothing to do because all the plumbing was new, so there was no maintenance required. So at that point, he had plenty of time to paint some pictures, but there weren't that many pictures from that period. It's the period beyond that. I don't know. It's what they say. If you want something done, you ask somebody who's too busy to do it because they're the only people who will do it for you. So I suppose, but it just seemed to me that we had time for guests and people. People came on weekends. They turned up. This was a very relaxed kind of a life compared with modern people. I mean, no people, I don't know about this. You just arrived at the driveway and said, "We're here for dinner." But people used to come and go Sundays and going. So there was a lot of a social life and trips. I mean, yeah, the other thing that's interesting, the trip to the Far East, they bought the first combi, Volkswagen combi, imported to Africa from Germany. The first one that was a camper at any rate. And well, what was nearly a year and a half all over Asia and so on in this vehicle, which is pretty cramped. We come back with a whole lot of sculptures. I mean, first of all, to do the sculptures, to cast them while you're in Japan, to come back with a vehicle full of physical stuff like that, it's quite interesting. I mean, they came with a Japanese pot, which was about 4 foot tall. Yeah. Anyway, it seems to be, I guess, if you want to make time for your art, you make it.
Seems like he really devoted himself to art. We've heard what he has done in visual art as a scientist, as a business person, and also his traveling experiences. Now, may I leave this to everyone to contribute what they may want to as a wind-up. However, we will continue to research and do a lot of groundwork so that we may assist in inputting in what Mr. Philip, if I've heard well, that he's writing something on the late David Chudy. Is that correct, Mr. Philip?
Well, I've already made a book which contained everything that I knew a few years ago. There might be more stuff which I would add to it. I think I'm probably going to do a couple of YouTube videos if I can find interesting stuff to say next to actual artworks. Probably less in terms of the writing, but there's definitely a lot of stuff that could be found. Unfortunately, I mean, even though I grew up speaking English and You know, my father was Polish, but he lived in Danzig, so he clearly spoke some German. I never really heard him speak any German at all. And in the early days with my mother, I found all these old letters from World War II, and where he's writing to my mother in German. Well, I can't, you know, these are handwritten and so on. My German is not good enough that I can read bad scrawled handwriting, so somebody else can look into it. But there's of those early letters, there's, you know, maybe it's a, you know, how are you? I'm fine, and my car needs repairing. But beyond that, there's a potential to find out quite a lot more buried in these huge piles of letters. That is probably going to add much more dimension to anything that I knew about. Yeah, it's funny, really, to be a kid from a guy who, in some ways, you ought to know them. On the other hand, you realize after many years, actually, well, I think I've had an illusion most of my life because I've been surrounded by the paintings. So it felt like I was close to him. But really, when it comes down to it, I mean, you know, I'm now a lifetime older than he was when he died. And you have this tendency to look up to your daddy. And now he's a kid compared to me. So I wonder really what, you know, the personality of the guy. It would be interesting to find that in some of these letters, maybe, apart from also maybe some information about the previous life.
Sure, that would be great. May I leave this time to the house to contribute in any way they can as we wind up?
Well, can I proceed?
Yes,
yeah, please
you may
do.
proceed.
Okay. Maybe as just a last contribution, as I mentioned earlier when we started the conversation, I am very much interested in continuing with, you know, the research, you know, about the works of David, and I think what could also be of interest is also just trying to find out if the brother to Fei Chung is still alive, considering that it is noted that he actually sort of like helped David at one point to put up the frieze at the African hospital, which is now known as the Gomo Hospital. So I'm sure, you know, having conversations with some of these people who had an engagement or, you know, actually worked with David could be very, very, very helpful in this continuous research about the life and times of David Chudy. And also, I'm really interested when I was just observing the terrazzo sculptures at the museum, I noticed that as much as they are still in good condition, they could really do with some retouch, you know, some touch-ups, maybe a little bit of cleaning here and there to bring back that, you know, that color, that vibrant appearance that they, you know, were synonymous with. So I don't know if it's something that is of interest to the gallery. At one point, you know, I mean, I don't know, we can, you know, consider this if it's something that is of value to you know, to do. So yeah, basically that is just what my last contributions to the conversation.
Yeah, just briefly, I found a letter. I'm trying to find it now, but it's not there. That it was. I found the letter from Fei Chung at one point. I think it wasn't her brother, but it was somebody else. But I'll let you know. It was some friend of her brother or somebody who worked, but it wasn't directly her brother. I think that she heard from her brother. And in terms of cleaning those sculptures, I don't really know what is possible. I think there used to be methods of using some kind of acid which would clean cement. It's probably a relatively simple cleaning of buildings in London. A lot of these blackened buildings, they have a very weak acid and they drip it down the side of the building for a few weeks, and the acid slowly takes away some of the stains. So you would probably find here there's not that much mold on those things, but somebody would have to know what's going to damage them. But probably washing with a very weak acid would bring up the shine on all of those sculptures. Yeah.
But you need a budget for it.
Yeah. So a bucket and a limbo.
You mean a bucket or a budget?
Well, he was talking about a budget. I'm talking about a bucket with and a piece of cloth and walking around there and wiping them down.
That's what exactly. That's what I was actually thinking of. You know, but yeah, then it will depend really on what could be best in terms of just bringing out that shine.
Well,
Yeah.
if you want to ask the administration at the gallery, not at the museum.
At the museum.
Yeah, they promised that they were sure years of documentation about the early days and the plans of the building, and they never found it then. But with a bit of pressure on them, it might be possible to find out. There must be newspaper clippings of when it was launched, all kinds of stuff like that, which would be interesting. But yeah. It used to be pretty much the Harare landmark, and the town's grown so much bigger now. They look over than they did.
Yes, thank you so much. Having made all these observations, this has been a very fruitful conversation. Now, as we wind up, I would like also to once more thank Mr. Philip Chudy for his commitment to safeguarding these pieces, for it is a testimony to the love and respect you have for your father's work. It means so much to the National Gallery of Zimbabwe, countless others who appreciate the beauty and significance of this art. Thank you.
Well, I want to make a tribute to you guys for putting on the show, because really that is it's a major to see. I'm looking forward to seeing that, but I think you've done a fantastic job.
Sure, would love that. Maybe we can have a walk around where you may be explaining some of the works to us in your own perspective. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming to the show, for convening for this conversation and the fruitful, very fruitful, contributions from each and everyone. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's still anyone with something to say. Thank you. We now officially close the conversation. You still have something to share, Mr. Kumbulani?
Well, no, not. I think I've exhausted my contributions. Just that I hope we continue with this research and try to find out more locations where David's work could be located. So I
Definitely.
guess it continues.
Thank you for that. Yes, earlier on I indicated that there were numerous other works of his not necessarily in Bulawayo, but around in Harare and around Harare. That's what I meant. Thank you so much.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Okay.
Bye,
okay, thank
Phil.
you. Bye, everyone.